In the heart of a sprawling, untamed wilderness stood the village of Thistlebrook, a place where life was hard, but the people were strong. The villagers worked the land, tending to their crops and livestock, living simple lives bound by tradition. Surrounding the village was the Eldergrove Forest, a dense, ancient wood that seemed to have a life of its own. The villagers rarely ventured into the forest, for it was said to be home to an old witch named Seraphina. Seraphina was a legend, spoken of in hushed tones by those who remembered the old ways. She was said to be as beautiful as she was powerful, with raven-black hair and eyes that shimmered like molten gold. But Seraphina was not like the other witches of folklore. She did not curse or hex for sport. Instead, she kept to herself, tending to the forest and its creatures, her magic rooted in the earth and the elements. The villagers left her offerings at the edge of the forest in exchange for protection and bountiful harvests, never daring to approach her domain. But one day, a young man named Alden, a farmer's son, found himself wandering near the edge of Eldergrove Forest. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with a warm smile and a kind heart. Alden was known throughout Thistlebrook as a hard worker, always ready to lend a hand to those in need. On this particular day, he was searching for herbs his mother needed for a remedy, and without realizing it, he strayed too far into the forest. The trees grew thicker, their branches intertwining overhead, blocking out the sun. A strange hush fell over the forest, the air thick with the scent of damp earth and wildflowers. Alden felt a shiver run down his spine, but he pressed on, determined to find what he needed. As he ventured deeper into the woods, he came upon a clearing, bathed in soft golden light. In the center of the clearing stood a small cottage, its walls covered in ivy, with a garden blooming with flowers of every color. A narrow path of smooth stones led to the front door, and the air was filled with the sound of birdsong. It was a place of unnatural beauty, and Alden knew without a doubt that he had found the witch's home. As he stood there, frozen in place, the door to the cottage opened, and out stepped Seraphina. She was even more beautiful than the stories had said, her hair cascading down her back like a waterfall of midnight, her eyes glowing with a strange, ethereal light. She moved with grace, her footsteps barely making a sound as she approached him. Alden should have been afraid, should have turned and fled back to the safety of his village. But instead, he found himself rooted to the spot, unable to look away from her. There was something about her, something that called to him in a way he couldn't explain. "Who are you?" Seraphina asked, her voice soft and melodic, like the rustle of leaves in the wind. "Alden," he replied, his voice trembling slightly. I'm looking for herbs. My mother is ill." Seraphina studied him for a long moment, her golden eyes piercing through him as if seeing into his very soul. Then, without a word, she turned and walked back into her cottage, leaving the door ajar. Alden hesitated for only a moment before following her inside. The interior of the cottage was warm and inviting, filled with the scent of herbs and spices. Shelves lined the walls, crammed with jars and bottles of all shapes and sizes. A fire crackled in the hearth, casting a soft glow over the room. Seraphina moved with purpose, gathering the herbs Alden needed and placing them in a small pouch. As she worked, Alden couldn't help but watch her, mesmerized by her beauty and grace. He knew she was a witch, a creature of magic and mystery, but in that moment she seemed more human than the tales had made her out to be. When she finished, she handed him the pouch, her fingers brushing against his. The touch sent a jolt of electricity through him, and he looked up to find her staring at him with an intensity that made his heart race. "Thank you," Alden said, his voice barely above a whisper. Seraphina's lips curved into a small smile, but there was sadness in her eyes. "Be careful, Alden," she said softly. "The forest is not kind to those who linger." Alden nodded, his mind still reeling from the encounter. He turned to leave, but before he could take a step, Seraphina reached out and gently took his hand. "Come back if you ever need help," she said, her voice tinged with something that sounded like hope. I would like to see you again." Alden's heart skipped a beat, and he nodded, unable to find the words to reply. He left the cottage, his mind a whirlwind of thoughts and emotions. As he made his way back to the village, he couldn't shake the feeling that his life had changed in some profound way. Over the weeks that followed, Alden found himself returning to the edge of the forest, unable to resist the pull of the witch who had captured his heart. Each time he ventured into the woods, Seraphina was there, waiting for him with a smile that warmed his soul. They would talk for hours, sharing stories and laughter, their bond growing stronger with each passing day. But as their love blossomed, so too did the dangers that surrounded them. The villagers of Thistlebrook began to notice Alden's frequent trips to the forest, and whispers of his visits to the witch spread like wildfire. Fear and suspicion grew, and soon the villagers began to speak of curses and dark magic, of a witch who had ensnared one of their own. One night, as Alden lay in bed, he heard a knock at his door. When he opened it, he found a group of villagers standing on his doorstep, their faces grim and determined. "Alden," said the village elder, a stern man with a heavy brow, "we know you've been visiting the witch. This must stop. She's dangerous and she's put a spell on you." Alden's heart sank. "You don't understand," he protested. "Seraphina isn't like that. She's kind and gentle. She's helped me, and she's never harmed anyone." But the villagers would not listen. Fear had taken root in their hearts, and they were determined to rid themselves of the witch who they believed was a threat to their way of life. "We'll give you one chance, Alden," the elder said, his voice cold and unyielding. "You must end this, whatever it is you have with her. If you don't, we'll take matters into our own hands." Alden's blood ran cold. He knew what they meant. Seraphina's life was in danger, and he was the only one who could save her. The next day, Alden returned to the forest, his heart heavy with the weight of the decision he knew he had to make. When he reached the clearing, he found Seraphina waiting for him, her eyes filled with a mix of hope and fear. "Alden," she said softly, "what's wrong?" Alden hesitated, his heart breaking as he looked at the woman he loved. "The villagers," he said, his voice trembling. "They know about us. They think you've put a spell on me. They're afraid, Seraphina. They want to hurt you." Seraphina's face fell and she looked away, her shoulders slumping in defeat. "I knew this would happen," she whispered, more to herself than to him. "I've seen it before, in other villages. People fear what they don't understand." Tears welled in Alden's eyes as he reached out to take her hand. "We can run away," he said desperately. "We can leave this place, find somewhere far from here where no one knows us. We can be together." Seraphina shook her head, her expression one of sorrow. "I can't leave, Alden. The forest is my home and my magic is tied to it. If I leave, I'll lose everything that makes me who I am." Alden's heart shattered at her words. He had never felt so powerless, so torn between love and duty. But he knew that staying with her would only bring more pain and suffering to them both. "I love you, Seraphina," he said, his voice choked with emotion. "But I can't let them hurt you. I'll leave, and I'll never come back." Seraphina's eyes filled with tears as she nodded, her heart breaking along with his. "I love you too, Alden," she whispered. "More than you could ever know. But you're right. It's the only way." They embraced one last time, their tears mingling as they held each other close. Then, with a heavy heart, Alden turned and walked away, leaving the woman he loved behind forever. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months. Alden kept his promise, never returning to the forest, though it pained him more than anything he had ever known. The villagers, satisfied that the witch was no longer a threat, returned to their lives, the memory of Seraphina fading into legend once more. But the forest was never the same. The trees grew darker, their branches twisted and gnarled, and the once vibrant flowers withered and died. The birds stopped singing, and the air grew